Our next contributor is Selma Dabbagh, who has just written a book which is available here, Out of It. I can recommend it, I'm halfway through it. She's going to be able to sign them afterwards, but unfortunately mine's on Kindle, and I'm not sure if you can sign Kindle in quite the same way. But it gives me great pleasure. It's just as moving and strong and powerful a novel, whichever way you read it. Selma.
I'm going to be reading from my novel, which is based in Gaza. It also has sections in London and the Gulf. Of the three places, Gaza is the one that I'm the least familiar with. I have never lived there, although I visited it. But I felt that it was the most appropriate place to have the family set, because I felt that it was really the most extreme example of Palestinian dispossession, siege, and occupation. The main characters in this novel are two returnees, the children of PLO exiles. They're kind of PLO brats, they're quite spoilt. And they've come back into Gaza, and one is trying to find some way of engaging meaningfully, and the other one really actually just doesn't really want to have much to do with the politics anymore. So there's a tension going on there. The part I'm going to read tonight is a flashback, because it works quite well as a reading because it's self-contained, but it's a flashback through the eyes of the older brother Sabri, who is now in a wheelchair. And he's looking back at the time when he met his wife in the West Bank at university. The only reference that you need to know really is that when he talks about the outside leadership, it's, you probably will recognize it as being the PLO in exile. So this is talking about when he met her. Sabri and Lana had run against each other for the student council in the year that they had met. Lana's platform as an independent was one of opposition. She had opposed Sabri's party, the outside leadership, on the basis of its social conservatism. No one had anticipated her success. She had attained over 5% more votes than Sabri and all other outside leadership representatives, 15% more than the Islamic alternative. Sabri's friends had stopped laughing at her shoes and started examining her flyers instead. When Sabri had tried to persuade her to join his party, she had responded with a diatribe, an unnerving diatribe against the abuse of power by the outside leadership, against his party's receipt of funding from conservative regimes, their undermining of the true revolutionaries, their failure to enforce discipline for a true guerrilla fighting force, and their nepotism, cronyism, and errors of judgment. The corruption, the corruption, the corruption. Sabri did not ask her again. He had instead channeled his energies into a more primitive form of wooing, an attempt to seduce her body by pleasing her mind. His strategy was developed around her obsession with history and love of folklore. In these days, it had not been so hard to travel across the boundaries from one enemy-controlled area to another and into the land that was once theirs. So he took her to the Greek fountains in the occupied Syrian lands of the north, to Roman ruins lying under destroyed villages, to Canaanite temples and Solomon's wells. Whenever he could, he found cafes to take her where Qassasim storytellers recounted tales passed down from generation to generation. The strategy had worked. Lana had agreed to marry Sabri after a night spent huddled at the back of a Jerusalem cafe, listening to 3 hours of recitation of the story of the one-eyed ghoul. The audience had been rapt. Each line had been followed up by commentary from the coffee-drinking, narghileh-smoking gathering. He had watched her looking into the crowd in the soft light with her hair the way he liked it, slightly curled at the front and hanging down loose at the back over a chain of Red Cross stitches running around the collar of her shirt. He had surprised himself by the thought that maybe this in itself was enough. Maybe he didn't ever really need to touch her. Just to see her like this would be sufficient. But she must have felt his gaze, because she had turned and, with a gesture that was both manufactured and aimless at the same time, popped a piece of baklava into his mouth and with her fingers, as though it was a gesture that she had done many, many times before, and he knew that he had never thought anything quite so stupid in his whole life. Her family had opposed the marriage. They objected to Sabri's place of origin, to his religion, and to the party he was affiliated with. They did not dare voice their objection to his peasant lineage, as they knew that if they did, she would only have become even more determined to stay with him. But their objections did not stop Lana. Sabri and Lana had married in a small Jerusalem hotel where their faces were beamed by a video camera into hearts dancing on a wall, and Lana's head had been scraped with combs, rose stems and metal pins. Her face had been whitened to that of a geisha. Like a death mask, she whispered to Sabri as they had placed her next to him on a raised velvet throne. He had lost her in his pile of tacky lace. This was not what he had wanted. The Intifada was going on. Celebrations were banned. They had asked for something simple, old-fashioned, a dress with embroidery, hennaed hands, and a troupe of men dancing the debke at most. They didn't want the hall, or the mealy-mouthed waiters, or the Lebanese and Egyptian pop music about lost love and dying hearts. But both families had vetoed their modest plans absolutely, far more effectively than they had vetoed the marriage itself. "I want you to take that off now," he had said to her. He had whispered back to her. "What, this?" she had said, pointing up at her face. "Or this," she had said, plucking at her neckline, revealing just enough cleavage to drive him wild. Afterwards, his extended family commented on how inappropriate it was that she had looked so relaxed. She had not appeared to be intimidated by the prospect of the night that was to follow, but she had neither cared about upsetting everyone then, nor had she cared later when she had screamed at the delegation of women who had come to ululate outside their window. "But I thought you liked tradition and custom, Sabri had asked after the women had obediently got lost. His nose nuzzled against her cheek, his bent knee resting against the side of her newly waxed one, the agitated voices of the dismissed women dying away outside. "All traditions and customs except for those that subjugate women and deprive them of their sleep," she turned to him as their noses touched, and other pleasures. Naji had been born 9 months later, disappointed by his surroundings. The baby's colicky objection to the universe rarely subsided. From being dedicated to the pursuit of national liberation, his parents' lives were transformed into a perpetual quest to find something, anything that would quell their son's grief. There was no pattern as to what pleased him. On some days it was the afternoon sunlight fluttering between the leaves of a tree. On others, touching the shorn hair of boys' heads would make him gurgle and coo, his toes curled into each other with excitement. He was, according to all those around him, a cranky baby, and his parents sometimes said that the only thing that saved him from being given up on altogether was the way that he looked at them when he fed. With his eye around the bottle's teat, he would make eye-to-eye plea for understanding of quite how difficult it was, how hard it was for him to accept his disappointment. His eyes would widen with one hand holding onto the bottle, the other seeking out tenderness in anything that it could hold, a hand to play with and a forearm to stroke. Like everyone else in Gaza, they were living the Intifada, and it was going strong. Sabri had to go underground on more than one occasion, hiding in the camps for long periods. It was a time of smuggling messages across the border in swallowed sealed capsules, of army raids to remove fax machines, of banned flags, songs and school books, classes being held at home with the curtains drawn, of food being grown in back gardens to encourage self-sufficiency, boycotted produce being smashed against the walls in front of cheering crowds. Those were the heady days of resistance, heady days indeed. It was in that first year of their marriage when, buoyed up with international support, the outside leadership had made a declaration of independence. Sabri, like many, was sure that it would work. Legally and morally, he kept stressing to his audiences, their position could not be disputed. And even Lana, Sabri assured himself, almost confessed to being in accordance with the leadership's position. The occupiers' response to the declaration was predictable, but harsh. A curfew had been imposed and all lines of communication with the outside world were severed. Sabri needed to speak to his leaders, to let them know what the situation was on the inside. He needed to find a phone line that had not been cut. We could try the hospitals, Lama suggested. I wouldn't get through the roadblocks. The army's everywhere. We could come with you. If they stop us, we can say Naji's ill. I'm sure the doctors will let you make a call, she'd replied. That's not what I'm worried about. No, I'd rather you didn't come. What is it? You want us to stay at home? Do you want me to take up crochet too? Naji had wailed at her mother's voice. The army's very jumpy at the moment. I don't think we should take unnecessary risks, Sabri said, putting a bent finger into Naji's mouth for him to chew on. You do want us to stay at home then, don't you? That's not it, Sabri said. 1 year into marriage, he was already getting sloppy about hiding his petulance from his wife. How else are we going to talk to them? There's no other way. Stop arguing about it. We'll go tonight. The night before, Naji had slept, and they had managed to be together in a way that they had not been for such a long time, and well into the next day he could feel himself inside her. The night had wound itself around them, and throughout the day, trying to hold them back together. He had not wanted it to break. He had not wanted to argue with her. Sabri's car had been parked outside the gate for so long that he was not sure that it would start. They had spent a long time deciding what outfit Naji should wear, trying to imagine what would appeal to the soldiers at the checkpoints, and had settled on a sailor suit that somebody had given him as a present when he was born. They were still fussing as they started loading themselves into the car about whether made-up powdered milk could be reheated and where the spare nappies were. They kept asking each other whether Naji was going to be warm enough and going backwards and forwards on the question as to whether it was better for Naji to be in a car seat in the back or on Lana's lap in the front. They had been hissing at each other as Naji had been asleep. Lana had said it was more convincing for the baby to be with her, and so Sabri had tucked Naji in on his mother's lap and put the spare nappies by her feet, the water bottle by her side, and the dummy wrapped in plastic cling film into the glove compartment. He had walked around in front of the car, irritated, until he looked up and saw his wife through the windscreen, her head bent down on their son, her hair falling forwards, and he had felt the old pride that they were his family. They had just exchanged a final "all right" as he had put the key into the ignition when Naji, predisposed to diarrhea, had produced something of such vast and gaseous proportions that it woke him up into a state of boiling indignation. Sabri had looked at his watch. "I'll do it upstairs, it's easier," Lana had said, opening the car door, leaning backwards to get out, making her way to the porch, joggling the bundle of baby and blanket in one arm as she searched in the back pocket for the door key with the other. They had been a while, 7 minutes. Sabri had waited. The moon had been full that night, an orange disc struggling between the buildings at the end of the road, shining like a Ramadan fanus. Sabri had seen the bedroom light go on. He had heard Naji's wails from the window and had been able to make out the murmur of Lana's comforting. The crying continued as the light went off, and Naji had only stopped as they entered the stairwell. Sabri had seen them come back out onto the porch. He must have turned the key in the ignition when they reached the gate. He was not sure. It was a guess. He did not know what had happened. He could not remember. Something white and definitive had blasted reality from him, and then they were gone. The psychiatrist who visited Sabri in hospital afterwards said that it was surprising that he remembered so much, but it was all untrustworthy. If asked what his last memories were before the explosion, he would have said that it was of being with Lana and Naji on the staircase. He could clearly see them walking down the stairs, Naji in a beige blanket with a satin rabbit in a bow tie in the corner, his hair tufty with patches of baldness at the back where its softness had been rubbed off by sleep, a face blotchy with tears, his eyes trying to focus on the thick blue ceramic tile outside the neighbour's door. There was Lana too, her blow-dried hair stuck behind her ears, lipstick remaining only on the edges of her lips, her hand on Naji's back. But for all its clarity, it was a scam, that memory, a fabrication. He could not have seen them on the stairs. He had never been on the stairs with them. He had been in the car. To hell with memory. It was like feeling around in a basket of apples, only to be confronted by a snake. Thank you.